The Pacific horizon stretched endlessly as the cargo ship Monterey Star carved through calm waters, en route from Guam to San Diego. It was a massive container vessel, stacked high with sealed boxes of military-grade supplies, non-lethal but sensitive enough to demand discretion. The crew, mostly civilians contracted through a U.S. logistics agency, operated under quiet routine. No fanfare, just responsibility and a tight timetable. Captain Laura Quinn, a seasoned mariner with 20 years in naval transport, stood in the bridge's glass-encased tower, sipping bitter coffee. She kept her gaze locked on the radar screen, noting the slow-moving blip that had appeared an hour earlier, just barely on the edge of detection. It wasn't broadcasting an AIS, Automatic Identification System signature, which immediately raised her suspicion. Every commercial vessel in the area adhered to that standard. Whoever this was, they didn't want to be seen. Below deck, Mate Evan Park, the youngest officer on board, scanned satellite data on a backup terminal. He frowned. Still nothing on the registry. Could be a ghost ship, or someone spoofing ID. "Or watching us," Laura replied, barely turning. Her tone was even, but her instincts were stirring. She'd dealt with Russian shadowing before, especially in colder waters. But here, near the Philippine Sea, it could only mean one thing: the Chinese. At 1,200 feet, the Monterey Star wasn't agile, but she was equipped with high-frequency communications and surveillance-grade optics. Laura issued a quiet order. "Initiate passive observation, no aggressive action. Let's document everything." As the crew worked to reposition cameras toward the trailing blip, the fog on the horizon began to thin. Then it came into view, a sleek, dark-hulled vessel maintaining a parallel course. It was less than 3 nautical miles off the stern quarter, close enough to see structure, but too distant to engage. Its gray silhouette, blocky electronic arrays, and low profile left no doubt. "Type 815G, Park muttered, recognizing the infamous Chinese spy ship known for tracking U.S. naval movements. Laura nodded grimly. "They're not hiding anymore." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of equipment and low murmurs of the watch crew. Even at this distance, the spy ship's posture was menacing, no flags visible, no radio contact, no lights despite approaching dusk. And yet, it wasn't illegal. They were still in international waters, but the intentions were unmistakable. Every 20 minutes, Laura logged detailed status reports. She refused to flinch. The Chinese vessel, as if aware of every move, began adjusting speed, sometimes falling back, sometimes closing in. It was a cat-and-mouse dance, but only one side was armed with the capabilities of a military intelligence unit. Later that evening, with the sky cloaked in orange haze and ocean winds stiffening, a fresh report came from the stern camera crew. Park reviewed the footage, then showed Laura. A sleek, dark object had skimmed the water before rising briefly, possibly a drone launched from the spy ship. "They're recording us," he said, anger threading into his voice. "Or worse." Laura's face hardened. "They want us to feel watched. They're testing nerves." She opened encrypted communications to U.S. Pacific Command, relaying everything: coordinates, visuals, and vessel behavior. The response was prompt but diplomatic. "Maintain current heading, avoid provocation, aerial patrol en route within 5 hours." That wasn't the reassurance she'd hoped for. 5 hours could be a lifetime if something went wrong. Dinner was served late. Most of the crew ate in silence, tension running beneath the surface like a riptide. Some joked dryly about the uninvited guest tailing them. But nobody laughed when the spy ship suddenly killed its lights completely, vanishing into the night like a predator sinking beneath the waves. Laura returned to the bridge. "All systems to night mode, no external lighting, maintain quiet operations, we match their blackout." Now, it was a waiting game. Radar pings showed nothing. The Chinese ship had likely gone passive, running silent with stealth protocols engaged. but everyone aboard the Monterey Star knew it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, closer than they could prove. For the first time in years, Laura felt something she couldn't admit to the crew: dread. At midnight, Park whispered from the comms deck, "It's not just surveillance. They're trying to unnerve us, to see how close they can get before we blink." Laura nodded, then said softly, "Let's make sure we don't." And outside, beyond the red-lit interior and the steel silence, the ocean breathed, vast, empty, and no longer indifferent. The sea remained calm, but inside the Monterey Star, a storm of unease had settled. For nearly 12 hours, the ship had been under silent surveillance. The Chinese vessel, likely a Type 815G intelligence ship, remained unseen but undoubtedly present. Captain Laura Quinn had barely slept. Her years on the water had taught her one immutable truth: it's not always the waves you see that do the most damage. Sometimes it's what waits beneath them. In the control room, lit in red to preserve night vision, Laura leaned over the sonar console. The passive sonar sweep had picked up faint propulsion noise, not loud enough to alarm, but too consistent to be natural. It was circling now, a shadow ghosting just outside of certainty. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the console's edge. They were being probed. Nearby, Evan Park stared intently at the digital chart. "They're hurting us," gently adjusting their pattern, "making sure we know they're still out there." Laura nodded. "And still no comms?" "None. We pinged an open band hail 5 times. They're ignoring it." Protocol demanded restraint. The Monterey Star wasn't a warship. It was a cargo vessel, albeit one carrying sensitive logistical material. It had no weapons, no armed guards, and only limited defensive measures. Confrontation wasn't an option, but the psychological war had clearly begun. At 0400 hours, a soft alert chimed from the deck cams. A small, fast-moving RIB, rigid inflatable boat, had been spotted roughly 2 nautical miles off the port side. It disappeared within seconds, but the timing was too precise to be coincidental. Laura reviewed the frame-by-frame footage. The silhouette of the craft matched Chinese naval fast boats used for rapid approach and observe tactics. "They're escalating," Park said, tension lacing his voice. "They're collecting signatures," Laura replied. "Acoustic, electromagnetic, visual, maybe even crew routines." Below deck, Chief Engineer Samir Patel was overseeing a pressure valve maintenance when the lights flickered, a momentary glitch. He paused, glancing at the diagnostic screen. No surge, no fault. But something wasn't right. Minutes later, his suspicions deepened when one of the refrigerated container sensors reported an internal spike, just for a split second. He climbed to the bridge and relayed the oddities. "Could be coincidence," he admitted, "but 2 isolated blips in critical systems? Someone might be scanning us electronically." Laura didn't doubt it. "They want a full picture: systems, weaknesses, crew behavior. We're a floating case study to them." By morning, visibility improved, and with it, the spy ship reappeared, this time brazenly close, barely 2 nautical miles away. It wasn't hiding now. Crew could be seen on its deck, some holding binoculars. The message was clear: "We're watching you. What will you do about it?" Laura made the decision to initiate a course deviation. Not erratic, but subtle. It was a test. A 5-degree starboard shift that would either provoke a reaction or be ignored. Within minutes, the Chinese vessel adjusted as well, maintaining their proximity. "It's like they're dancing with us," Park murmured, "matching every step. They want us to know we're not alone." Laura stood silent. It wasn't just about this ship. It was about projection, testing response protocols, measuring psychological thresholds. This wasn't a one-off encounter. It was part of a larger doctrine, a long game of pressure, intimidation, and normalization. By midday, U.S. Pacific Command finally responded with tactical updates. A Navy P-8 Poseidon aircraft was en route for reconnaissance, with an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer projected to intercept within 6 hours. That was a relief, but still a long time to remain isolated. Park looked up from the console. "Should we prep the crew for potential boarding?" "No," Laura replied. "That'll only add panic. But double security watches, and get all critical systems encrypted. If they're trying to hack, they'll need more than RF scans." Down in the galley, crew whispers began to grow louder. Some claimed they saw a laser glint from the spy ship's top deck, maybe range-finding gear. Others were convinced the RIB was launched again, briefly, just before dawn. Fear was growing, but Laura knew something more dangerous was taking root. Fatigue. The prolonged tension was wearing on everyone. To address it, she called a short crew assembly in the main briefing room. No dramatics, just clarity. "Yes, we're being shadowed," she told them plainly. "Yes, this is a foreign military vessel, but we are not doing anything wrong. We're not in their waters. We're not broadcasting threats. We're staying the course and following protocol. That is our greatest strength, discipline under pressure." It wasn't a heroic speech, but it was calm, real, and enough to steel their nerves. That afternoon, the sea grew choppier. Swells reached 5 feet, then 7, making the Monterey Star shudder slightly with each dip. The spy ship, lighter and smaller, adjusted accordingly, sometimes slipping nearly out of view, only to reappear moments later. Then came the twist. From one of the midship containers, a faint high-frequency interference began disrupting the Monterey Star's internal comms. Not a full blackout, but enough to cause cross-channel echoes and static-laced transmissions. Park narrowed it down. It was likely external. Maybe a directed burst from the Chinese vessel aimed at testing their signal resilience. Laura's face darkened. "They're probing our digital guts now?" Despite everything, she held her course. If they blinked, changed trajectory, or transmitted distress, it would hand the narrative over. But if they held firm, the Chinese ship would eventually withdraw, or risk escalating into international incident territory. As the sun lowered into a golden haze and the wind stiffened once more, a new dot appeared on the far horizon. Sleek, fast, and unmistakably American, a Navy P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft sweeping in low across the sea. The spy ship, still shadowing, suddenly began to alter course. "They're backing off," Park said, relief in his voice. Laura exhaled slowly, not smiling. "Only for now." The crew watched silently as the spy vessel pulled away, slowly disappearing into the haze, just as the Monterey Star's radar lit up with incoming Allied signals. But the echo of the last 40 hours remained, not just the feeling of being watched, but the certainty that this was becoming the new normal. And no one, not even a seasoned captain, could ever fully get used to that. The ocean had calmed, but the tension aboard the Monterey Star hadn't. With the Chinese spy ship retreating to the edge of radar range and U.S. naval assets now in proximity, Captain Laura Quinn should have felt a wave of relief. Instead, she felt watched, like the game had only paused, not ended. The psychological shadow still clung to her crew. She could see it in the silence of the mess hall, the tight jaws on the bridge, and the eyes that darted just a second too long to the radar screens. Chief Engineer Samir Patel hadn't stopped checking logs since the disruption in their systems the day prior. His fingers flew over the control interface, eyes locked on code and circuit reports. Something didn't add up. A digital fingerprint, a minor spike in their internal network, had the hallmarks of a passive breach attempt. It didn't affect operations, but it whispered of intent, like someone had knocked gently on the doors of their most guarded systems, only to walk away. "Captain," he said, walking onto the bridge, "I think they tried to infiltrate one of our containers. Not physically, Electronically. Laura didn't flinch. She'd suspected as much. Did they get in? She asked. Samir shook his head. Number they poked, but our firewalls held. Still, it tells me they weren't just observing. They were trying to understand us, learn patterns, weaknesses, not just the ship. The crew. They're building a dossier, said Park, who had just stepped back from a status check on their encrypted satellite link. Not just about our systems, but how we respond under pressure. Our reaction speed, our protocols, how quickly we report, how aggressively we countermeasure. Laura nodded. They don't need a full confrontation. They just need enough data to make the next one more effective. The conversation was interrupted by a chirp on the comms. The USS Curtis Wilbur, the guided missile destroyer assigned to respond, had made visual contact. Within 20 minutes, the Navy warship pulled parallel with the Monterey Star, keeping a comfortable distance but making its presence unmistakably known. Its radar array rotated steadily, its gray hull cutting confidently through the sea. Laura gave the order to reduce speed and allow the Navy ship to take point. From her perch in the command room, she watched the contrast. Their own civilian vessel, burdened with cargo and diplomatic restraint, versus the Curtis Wilbur, built for confrontation and survival. Then came the unexpected hail. A calm voice filtered through the radio. Monterey Star, this is Commander Reed aboard USS Curtis Wilbur. We've reviewed the surveillance logs forwarded from your bridge, including deck cam visuals. You were right to maintain protocol, but you should know, this wasn't random. Laura leaned into the mic. So it's been happening elsewhere. All across the Pacific, Reed confirmed. Similar vessels, similar behavior. Passive observation, electronic sweeps, sometimes signal jamming. It's increasing. They're testing civilian resilience and cataloging response times ahead of bigger moves. War games? Park asked over her shoulder. Not yet, Reed replied, as if reading their thoughts, but it's how they're sharpening their blade. The call ended, but the words lingered. Later that night, Laura stood alone on the bridge. Below her, the deck lights were dimmed. A few crew members moved quietly, shifting pallets and securing tarps. The moon was out, glinting silver across the sea, and for a moment, everything was still. She looked out at the destroyer escort beside them, its silhouette steady and strong. The presence of that warship was a comfort, but also a reminder. The ocean wasn't the same place it had been 5 years ago. Neither were the skies. Neither were they. Behind her, Park entered with 2 mugs of coffee, offering her one. He didn't speak at first, just leaned beside her against the rail. They'll come again, he said eventually. They always do, she replied. But next time we'll be ready sooner, and so will they. Park nodded slowly. Do you ever think we're not just being observed, but studied like variables in an experiment? All the time, she said, because that's exactly what this is. Below, the engines thrummed softly, their rhythm unbroken. Around them, the sea stretched out like a living, watching thing. Somewhere beyond the dark curve of the horizon, more eyes were waiting. Cameras, antennas, algorithms parsing every move they made. But the Monterey Star was still afloat, still on course, still sending its signal. That mattered. Laura took a sip of the coffee and stared into the night. They hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't had to. Resilience wasn't about aggression. It was about not flinching when the shadows drew close. And as dawn broke, painting the ocean in shades of fire and gold, she knew. The battle had already begun, and it wasn't measured in missiles or maydays. It was measured in silence, poise, and the steady hum of a ship that refused to break.